Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Could I just ask how many of us here work primarily in or with the corporate sector? If you could just put your hand up. Thank you. Most people. And those people who work mainly in or with the not-for-profit sector? Quite a few hands there too. What about the education sector? A few. So my guess is maybe many of you are thinking, what on earth has this got to do with me or the work I do in the corporate or the not-for-profit sector? But I'd put this to you. What if our schools were not, as Peter Senge described, focused on individuals and a fierce culture of individualism? But what if our schools produced even more young people who were creative, self-aware, confident, and quite capable of being really altruistic contributors to society? What if schools could produce more young people like that? We would all be affected in our families, in our workplaces, and in the society that we live. And so I guess that's why it's a passion for me, educational leadership. How to support people to become better leaders within schools and school sector so that ultimately all of us are impacted in a really positive way. So my view is that if you improve schools, you improve people's lives, society and the world. It's pretty big. So I'm also focusing, as you see the title of this presentation, on purposeful partnership. Just as Peter spoke and Bob spoke about collective leadership, we will mention that, and I'll certainly refer to how we're doing that, particularly in a particular program that I'm responsible for, but also how lots of other partnerships combine to make sure that that leadership happens and that collective leadership happens more easily. So that's where I'm going to take you, to be focusing on a particular program, but to start with the underpinnings and the underpinning theory behind that. This comes from the conference literature. Leadership's primary purpose, what if leadership's primary purpose is to create more leaders and unleash collective creative capacity? And we saw wonderful examples in that with Jim, and also in a lot of the statistical evidence that we had also from Bob. Gary Hamel, who is a professor at London Business School, claims that the dilemma is that as complex as our organisations have grown, as fast as the environment is changing, there are just not enough extraordinary leaders to go around. Are you aware of that too? I certainly am. And also Peter Senge says the key to going forward is that we have to nurture and grow a new form of leadership that doesn't depend on extraordinary individuals. And I know as a leader myself, I can't do it by myself. I need to have others around me, so together that we do it. This is a very favourite image of mine. My colleague Jenny, who has a science background, tells me, Leoni, you've got to mention it's a one-cell organism, but it is a picture of an organism. And you can just imagine if this was a video. Everything would be moving all the time. The colours would change. Parts of it would grow and expand. Parts of it would contract. And this is a single cell. But I think for us, it's a metaphor which represents the world that we live in. It's constantly changing, and hence it's a little bit, to lead in this sort of context, you need to be dancing on a shifting carpet. It conveys some of that complexity and the need to obviously stay on your feet. If I'll just give you an opportunity to read this. The key point that my colleague and I make in this quote from our book is that even change is changing. It's not just the context. We used to be able to predict fairly easily a linear sort of approach to change. Now it's becoming multidimensional, multi-focused. Leadership in this sort of context has to be vastly different. Old methods and individual focus will no longer work. And so I am very fortunate to have a role as Dean of the Leadership Centre at the Association of Independent Schools to be growing leaders. Now, all of you in your work are also in various ways growing leaders as well. My role is to grow leaders within the education context primarily, but not just limited to that. I've worked for many years in schools, as Adele pointed out, and as school principal in 2 contexts over 16 years, I always was committed to developing students, not just academically, but as whole people and as leaders, and also staff. And very much the way leadership happened in the schools that I was part of was that people were encouraged to step up, to look inwards and to express themselves outwards. So consequently, over the years, 12 teachers who have worked with me in schools have become principals themselves. And many other people have gone on to have other senior positions, sometimes in academia and sometimes in the commercial world, the corporate world. So very important to be growing people around you. The school that I mainly was working in fact was there as principal for 14 years, is this school. As you can see, it's not a new school. In fact, it was established in 1897. And it's an independent day and boarding school for girls here in Sydney. And at the time when I came to it, there were signs that although it was very well recognised and highly regarded in the local community and beyond, there were some signs that it was starting to head towards mediocrity. It is now, through a reinvention process, that we were all involved in a collective leadership operation over a number of years. It is now a dynamic, holistic community, now led by the woman who was deputy with me for 7 years, and she's taken it on bigger and better than it ever was under my leadership. And the school is successful on any measure you care to name. Academically, in terms of the quality of the graduates that it produces and the calibre of the teachers it attracts and develops. So now, however, my role is not just in a single school, but it's wonderful to have a much broader canvas to hopefully to be able to impact on many, many schools and consequently to the role of society and families and communities. So the story of that reinvention is captured in this book. Interesting title, hey? In fact, the title, Dancing on a Shifting Carpet, is not my own. It's borrowed. And it came from an anonymous description of the process of reinventing the school, which I also used as the focus of my PhD study. And I had an external researcher come in to conduct focus groups and individual interviews with people. Dancing on a shifting carpet was the term that one person, I don't even know if it was a teacher within the school, a staff member somewhere, said that's what it was like. It was like dancing on a shifting carpet. And that really resonated with me. And if you think about that, it really describes the flexibility, grace, balance that you need when everything seems to be changing at once. To say nothing of the artistry and the passion and commitment also involved. There's a lot of rigour around dancing. You make the carpet shift, you've got to be even better at it. It's difficult work, but it's also joyful and a joyful, exuberant experience. And so is working with others to develop a culture of shared and collective leadership. The designated leader, that's the person whose role description says that you're the leader, has special responsibilities, however. And Greenleaf, Robert Greenleaf, refers to the need for foresight of those who are in designated leadership positions. And that's really the message of Peter Senge and also of Bob this morning. You have to be aware of what's happening or what's not happening. This is what Greenleaf says. The phrase there that resonated with me and still does is that schizoid kind of life. Does that resonate with any of you? Leadership? Yeah. And when I first described that to someone, they sort of looked at me a little askance as if I had really lost it. I mean, I've usually only half lost it. But that sense of being in a sort of a schizoid life, you've got to be there in the middle of things, and you've also got to be detached, rising above, seeing things from a different perspective. And as Peter Senge said, it's much, much more effective if you can do that with other people. If you can triangulate that, because no matter how much we try to expand our perspective and our consciousness, we are still but one person. So rising above that is much, much better and more coherent if you've got several people, many people to share that with you. In their book, Leadership on the Line, Ronald Heifetz and Marty Linsky, they suggest something similar. They don't use that term schizoid, but they talk about needing to be on the balcony and on the dance floor. See, I love dancing. Dance floors come into it. So if you're on the balcony, you're actually looking down, as the photographer was in this particular shot. You're looking down. You're seeing how the band is operating. You're seeing who's dancing with whom. You're seeing who's out of the action, who's talking with whom. You've got a sense of the pattern when you're on the balcony. At the same time, effective leaders have to be on the dance floor at the same time. They have to be hearing the perspective of others. They have to feel the music in their bones. They have to be part of the action. And so very much this is what leads me to see the value in Charles Handy's sigmoid curve. I often refer to this. Can I just see how many of you are familiar with this model of Charles Handy? Fantastic. For some of you, it's familiar, for others not. Basically, Charles Handy says that all organisations and groups of people basically go through troughs and peaks. Inevitable. And if you think about even your own relationships, my husband and I have been married for many, many years. That goes through troughs, it goes through peaks as well. That can happen with everything. It does happen with everything. It's part of that human condition. What Charles Handy says is that the real clue is at point A, really counterintuitively, because everything's going fantastically. That's where a leader or the leadership needs to say, hey, we've got to start another curve. The word sigmoid is just based on the Greek letter S, sigma. That's the letter S. So here you intervene and you start a new way of being and interpreting. You are looking at your context, looking at what's around and seeing that in fact you need to go to a different dimension. Most organisations, however, really enjoy this upward ride, inevitably start the decline, and it's only here at B that they really realise something's got to be done. And I suppose we could see a bit of that in the story of Jim. And much harder to have to start a new sigmoid curve at that point. So the more we unleash creative, collective leadership, we're going to have more people who get to this point and say, hey guys and girls, we need to be really seriously thinking about the next wave. Very often in my former school, there was a lot of pushback. If it ain't broke, why fix it? And we've heard that many times before. It might not be broke, but unless you intervene, things will inevitably decline. The more we unleash that creative, collective leadership capacity, you're less likely to become complacent. And complacency was something that Lou Gerstner, who was the CEO of IBM from 1993 to 2002, that was something that he very much encountered, and he knew he was walking into it at IBM. IBM had been an industry leader. IBM was the leader in technology in those times. By 1993, however, it was very much on a Charles Handy downward slide. What he discovered was that people within IBM were very much focused on the past, had a sense of we're IBM, people come to us, we don't need to really change ourselves at all, we're the market leader. And you can imagine what happened. They were losing market share quite rapidly. Their staff were inward focused. They were not responsive to their clients, and certainly not getting much new business. So his challenge was very much to change, to reinvent IBM so that the culture of the organisation completely changed. And that was also the challenge that my colleagues and I at my former school had as well, to help people to see that the culture had to change. There were signs that it was becoming inward focusing and rather complacent too. But as you can also imagine, that this challenge, not everybody was really happy about the prospect of that. Most people don't really enjoy change, particularly change that is quite disruptive and changes the way they have traditionally thought about something. So the challenge was to collectively develop a new way of schooling, in my context, which better met the needs of contemporary young people while remaining true to the core values and tradition. And that was very similar to Lou Gerstner. In my view, the way you do that is through the essence of leadership, which is a combination of direction plus influence. That's my equation. So, direction, you have to have the leader, him or her, basically on top of the mountain. Scanning the horizon. What's the context in which we are currently and what is emerging on the horizon? And how do I lead this organisation and these people? However, to be really effective, that leader has to have one very long leg. They have to be slightly schizoid, okay? Because the other leg has to be at the bottom of the mountain, where most people are, and most people are quite happily going about their daily business. The real job of the leader is to harness that sort of collective leadership capacity and also show people how they too can have a broader perspective and be more involved and engaged in the future of the organisation rather than just being content with what's happening on a day-to-day basis. So very much too, the leader needs to help people, give them a hand, have pushback from them, which really clarifies your thinking, and also to be able to celebrate the small steps along the way, the points where you can stop and rest and look backwards at how far you've come, just like we again saw in Jim with those succession of leadership profiles, particularly from 13 back to 11. Now, I can say this now, this equation, because I've made so many mistakes along the way and I've learned so much from other people that it starts to help refine how you really think about leadership. So, as leaders, I pose these questions to you. How can we know the direction? How do we influence others to come along and lead with us? Because if we remain up on top of the mountain, we might be a prophet, but we're not a leader. We haven't brought people with us. And what does purposeful partnership look like? Which is a slightly different take on collective leadership. I ask you to just, for yourselves, think about each of those questions, and then perhaps share with the person beside you for a short time. Thank you. I suggest to you that if we keep our eyes and ears open into the world around us, we can learn a great deal about purposeful partnership and collective leadership from observing nature. The poet Coleridge was fascinated by birds. Have you ever been fascinated by watching a flock of birds in the sky? Well, Coleridge, in November 1799 to be precise, was on a coach, a stagecoach, on a trip back to London, where he saw this most amazing flocking of starlings, an enormous group of starlings. I've since discovered you call that a murmuration of starlings. I knew you'd want to know that. You can't help it. Once you're a teacher, you're always a teacher. So I'd like you to have a look at this very brief film clip, and you'll see why he was so fascinated. What you also will see on the outskirts shortly are two hawks trying to pick off stragglers. Have a look at how the flock deals with that. Amazing? Absolutely amazing. 60,000 starlings they estimated in that flock. And so, in the same way as it's obviously fascinating us here, it's fascinated many others since, trying to work out exactly how the birds were able to operate so collaboratively. There was no one leader in that flock. How did they do it? What can we learn from that? Well, it's also fascinated a guy called Craig Reynolds, who back in 1987 developed a computer simulation which he called Boyd's. So you can see the obvious analogies here. And that computer simulation helps us to understand how this collective leadership functioned. When he plugged in precise details, micromanagement, guess what happened? Chaos all over the place. Instead, each Boyd was programmed to abide by just 3 rules. The first one, maintain a minimum distance between all objects, including hawks presumably, and other Boyds. Second, try to match the velocity of your neighbours. No room here for the really extraordinary individual. Try to fly at the same speed. Third, try to move towards the perceived centre of the mass of birds in your neighbourhood. So let's have a look at the simulation that Craig Reynolds developed. You get a similar sort of pattern to the starlings in real life. And then there are ants. Now, ants have fascinated philosophers for thousands of years. You have one ant, it might be annoying, you can brush it off or squash it or whatever. They're tiny, but in large numbers, sometimes millions, they're quite formidable. Ants have been studied, and we know now that they can microwave intruders using their body heat. They can build bridges with their bodies to cross over large areas. And they can also form with their bodies rafts in a situation of flood. So they carry most of the colony with them to restart somewhere else. It's amazing. Study of ants is now being used by researchers, in particularly at Monash University, to study human traffic and particularly human evacuation patterns when there's a panic situation. How about that from ants? Now, learning from nature very much tells us a bit about collective leadership that's focused on survival. More often, however, human leadership is directed more about a preferred future. And core to that, core to collective leadership in a human context, is shared purpose, purposeful partnership. And this shared purpose provides both direction and influence. Most of us are probably familiar with Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. Yep. You might not be so familiar with a monograph that he's written, which is called Good to Great in the Social Sector. And I really strongly recommend it, particularly if you work in that particular sector. And that sense of shared purpose is what he stresses is absolutely important, and it's a real strength of the not-for-profit sector. I happen to be a board member of an international aid agency, and this agency can't pay huge salaries, but the focus on its mission and core purpose can be witnessed right throughout the organisation, including the large numbers of volunteers. The shared purpose gives rise to collective leadership. And I would maintain that in the corporate world, that is just as important. How do people really feel that they are part of the real reason for being? I'm conscious that for many people, the idea of purpose and mission might be slightly different. I'm using them to mean roughly the same thing. This is a quote from August Turak, who is a corporate CEO in America and who regularly takes time out just to be, just to get a sense of perspective. I actually came upon this book, was referred to in an earlier Leadership Circle conference, and I got it on Amazon. I found it fascinating. But this is what he says. The most critical task for any organisation is to always ask, what is the business of the business? What's the core purpose? And he says in a world where rate of change keeps accelerating, mission's now more important than ever. And he also adds to that, he says, otherwise we might still be in the business of making better and better buggy whips in a world where people are buying automobiles. So we've got to really focus. What is the essence of what we're doing? Encyclopedia Britannica got that wrong. I'd say Fairfax newspapers got that wrong. That their whole purpose is about providing information to people, not necessarily always through newspaper, through tabloids. This I find a very helpful symbol. So essentially, you've got the symbol for infinity. Here is the present moment. We loop back into our past and values and culture. Some organisations just do that, around, but the key is to be propelled into the future, being on the mountaintop. That informs your present. So it's a constant journey here, linking things together, linking people, past, task and values, any of those sorts of variables. So all the time it's a constant reflection that's going on all the time. And this is really key to all of that. Sengi, this comes from Sengi. It's the cultivating of our humanity, linking our values, our purpose, our people, and the task together in that constant journey through infinity that is the core message for leadership in our times. Now, the second part of my equation is influence. As leaders, we must be worthy of being followed, and we must be capable of inspiring others to leadership because they see what we do. Walking the walk. Essentially, and this is something that Bob mentioned, we really lead who we are. It's not what we do, people see who we are. And it's that authenticity between what we say, what we do, and who we are that's absolutely pivotal. for influencing collective leadership. This quote comes from Harvard Business Review, and I guess in that corporate sector, Stanford Graduate School of Business Advisory Council presumably know what they're talking about in the corporate sector. But look at what they identified almost unanimously as the most important leadership capability: self-awareness. Absolutely pivotal. And Warren Bennis, who's probably very well known to many of you, he also talks about the importance of that inner journey and of values, knowing who you are, being true to yourself. And this is where the Leadership Circle profile, from my experience and obviously what I've read and heard, is absolutely unique in my view. That ability to really have a finely calibrated, valid and reliable mirror for understanding our internal operating system and the impact of our leadership behaviours. We use that in the program I'm about to describe to you. So very much what we're about is growing self and growing others. We need to work on ourselves before we can effectively develop other people's capacity. And so I guess this is really core to my work now. From leading a school and growing leaders within my own school, the focus is now being able to grow leaders within and for other schools, and also for people in other sectors. So we do this through programs, processes, and contributing to the world of leadership, and particularly educational leadership. This is our intent in our leadership centre at AIS. We want to stretch ourselves because we believe that the world leadership needs stretching too. It's not just learning that we're looking at improving, it's improving lives and learning, and not just of students, of school communities. And so why is educational leadership so important? This is what we know from research, that leadership has a major impact on the quality of student outcomes, and not just learning outcomes. That schools are the social institution with the greatest impact on the lives of young people and their families, and I'm sure you would be aware of this in your own lives. Once upon a time, there were institutions like Boy Scouts, local tennis clubs. The role of churches was much bigger than it is now. These days, the school is an absolute hub for community. So you improve schools, obviously you have a very significant leveraging impact on the quality of a society. As we know, also from the research, it's the greatest single influence in improving the quality of lives of individuals and communities, which is why the UN Millennium Goals so much focus on participation and improvement in education. But what we expect of school leaders now is huge. Linda Darling-Hammond and her colleagues said they play a daunting array of roles. They have to be visionaries, change agents. They have to know about leading learning, instructional leaders. They have to run vast campuses, multi-million-dollar campuses, if you look at all the buildings and facilities. The operating budget of many schools, of most schools now, runs into the tens of millions of dollars. They have to be curriculum assessment experts, they have to manage their budget, they have to incorporate a lot of programs within and beyond their school. And to do all of this, they have to have a really sophisticated understanding of people, of organisations and organisational change. Can you see why across the world there aren't all that many people who are putting up their hands to be principals? So, my view is it is the most rewarding role that you could ever imagine. Anything that helps to develop human beings and help them to develop themselves into creative, capable citizens is the most worthwhile job that you can ever do. We are so lucky in that we have the partnership, purposeful partnership of many, many people to help us to develop leaders, to see the joy in a role like this. The most significant program we develop is called our Flagship program, and this is what I'm going to speak with you about now. We are so lucky to have, and fortunate to have, the assistance of Roma and Adele and many of the Leadership Circle family. And here in the audience today, we have people who have actually completed this program and who are currently involved in it. But there's many special leadership programs around. What makes this one so special? Let me take you through it. So essentially, this is a program open to people who are in leadership roles at sort of senior leadership team level, who may be contemplating principalship for themselves. It's open to participants from any sort of school, government school, Catholic schools, independent schools, in any state or territory, primary or secondary, and from next year we are likely to have somebody coming from Papua New Guinea, our first international participant. Essentially, what we're wanting to do is develop wise, well-informed, resilient and resourceful leaders who will have the vision and the commitment and the skills to meet the needs of young people in this vastly different context. So, these are the 12 reasons why it's so special. Bob talked about the inner game and the outer game. You can see the alignment. We talk about the journey of leadership in our Leadership Centre, and we talk about the inner journey. The inner journey of self-awareness, knowing who you are, your values, having an insight. As much about the outer journey, which is the development of knowledge and skills, particular to those needs of that role. Very much research-based. We have an academic reference group, who I'll refer to later, who are very much a group of critical friends who are worldwide scholars. It also includes the Leadership Circle profile. And this is an absolutely core part of this program because it gives people the tools for self-awareness. Number 5 is where we have tremendous support, as well as number 4, from the Leadership Circle. Professional companion is a phrase you probably haven't heard before. It's one I coined, but in among us today we have both people who are acting in the role of professional companion and people from the Leadership Circle family who have very much supported them and support them in an ongoing way. The people who are invited to be professional companions are already veteran principals, mostly retired. People who are able to walk with rather than tell how. It's got very strong elements of coaching and mentoring, but also other capacities in that holistic role of professional companion. We have people who are presenting in our program, which is 10 days long, from who have international reputations in the area of educational leadership. Every person who does this program has to lead a school-wide improvement process, which is linked to the strategy within their school. So it's a bit like Bob was saying too. The actual work of their everyday existence becomes the focus of what they're doing within this program. They are taking it back to their school places and they're coming back in to analyse and understand further about themselves and about the role of leadership. Very strong requirement of collaboration. The collaborative learning has remained a key part even after the program is over. Last year's cohort set up a Facebook for themselves, Facebook page. They still are working together, learning together as a group without our direct input any longer. Very rigorous requirements, including a 5,000-word reflective piece at the very end of the program, which is designed to help them align all of their understandings. Because of the rigour, we've managed to get a quarter of a master's degree credit with one university. Others are following as well. We evaluated hard, and we also delighted to be sharing this because we feel so passionate that it is something so good for leaders and for schools. Essentially, it's based on this element. So very much starting with values and purpose and vision, emphasis on the person of the leader, that collegial aspect, professional companioning, and the work in their school. In terms of the curriculum, it's about leading learning, relational leadership, how to work effectively with people and with groups, organisational understanding. Organisational leadership includes managing finance, managing property, managing the media, doing strategy, all of those sorts of elements. And contextual leadership, that's where we get people doing this. What's the context, globally, educationally, nationally, and so forth. The actual work that they do covers all of this. A lot of emphasis placed on reflection and journaling. school visits where they are very much focused on understanding particular elements about educational leadership, and shadowing of an experienced principal, and for some people also who choose to, shadowing of a leader in the corporate sector, which many people find incredibly valuable. In terms of evaluating, there's 4 levels: the design, how participants are perceiving it, and how effectively it's translating into the workplace. And we get that feedback from the people within the school. They don't just say that themselves. But it's also very obvious to us from the quality of the conversations that are happening within the program days. And then there's also a longitudinal evaluation being put in place. My colleague Jenny, with a science background, is actually undertaking a PhD study where she will be tracking this over many iterations of the program, seeing the ongoing impact. So how do we know it's effective? We also had last year funding to do a year-long evaluation at arm's length. This was from the person who leads educational leadership in one of our Sydney universities. And basically, these are some of the findings that this researcher came up with. It was an unqualified success. But look at this. Most people who started off this program, no matter how much we tried to prepare them, were not aware, didn't realise that it was really about them. So this was a major understanding for them, and they came to see that knowing themselves was more important than knowing stuff, knowing how to do stuff. They thought the program was going to be more about knowing what I should do. This was really about who should I be. They also realised they had to unlearn a lot of behaviours that had served them very well. And they had to be better at articulating and being consistent with their personal vision and values, and reflecting these in how they showed up with people. And already the impact on their current schools. This came out in the research from that third party. We also know from the number of applications, this has a limit of 30. We had almost 50 applications from various parts of Australia, mainly in New South Wales, however, and we also have a lot of word-of-mouth recommendations happening. So these are some of the ways we know. But what do the people themselves say? Here are a few people who were in last year's program. This person came from Sydney, deputy headmaster. This lady came from a vastly different school, very small community Steiner school up in Cape Byron. And then these two from Sydney schools, an all-girls school and a Jewish school in Randwick. So that's what the participants are saying. We can't do this by ourselves, however. So this is where the purposeful partnership comes in. As they say, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a whole lot of purposeful partnerships to actually develop a program that's going to make an enormous difference in the lives of, hopefully, thousands and thousands of young people and ultimately of our society. So this is the group of scholars of international reputation who act as critical friends to me and my colleagues in designing and evaluating and giving us research that will be suitable for us. A wonderful professional partnership. Many of these people, for example, present within the program days. We also have purposeful partnerships with universities and other professional associations. Our quarter of a master's degree credit comes from University of New South Wales, to be shortly followed by Macquarie. The researcher who did the year-long evaluation was from Macquarie University. We are working closely. His name is Norman McCullough. He and I have presented at international and national conferences, particularly on this program and its evaluation. AITSL, Australian Institute for Teaching and School Leadership, provided the funds for that evaluation last year. And Independent Schools Tasmania is a sister organisation in Tasmania who provides scholarships to enable people from Tasmania to access this program. We also have purposeful partnership with a wider range of sponsors. These sponsors, and we note with great pride this one, this is our most recent sponsor, and we are just delighted. We have had a really good working relationship with the Leadership Circle, and it gives us tremendous joy to actually formalise that, to have the logo up there to say that we are in this together. So our sponsors are wonderful. Some of our sponsors provide monetary support, some of them provide in-kind support, and some of them provide support the in-kind support is in terms of sharing their expertise. For example, from Nexia, which is a accountancy firm, they actually present sessions within our programs for business managers within schools. And Roma very kindly presents sessions within this flagship program, particularly the parts around the Leadership Circle profile. What we also benefit, it's not just the in-kind or the monetary benefits that is so important with our sponsors, but it's that partnership, understanding more about the work of schools, the work of educational leaders, and why educational leadership is so important. So they're partnering with us to help us keep going in a very sustainable way. NAB, for example, National Australia Bank, that is the organisation that works with us so that participants in the flagship program can shadow senior corporate leaders. There's a great deal of effort and energy goes into that program, and we are so grateful to these very busy senior leaders giving up their time and their day to enable somebody who is potentially a new school principal to be able to learn from them. As I prepare to leave you now, I'd just like to share with you this poem from David Whyte, a poet whom I love. Poetry needs to be heard as well as read, so let me read it to you. Work is the very fire where we are baked to perfection. And like the master of the fire itself, we add the essential ingredient and fulfillment when we walk into the flames ourselves and fuel the transformation of ordinary, everyday forms into the exquisite and the rare. So we want to develop leaders who are fired by their work, who see their work as a means not only of bringing out leadership capabilities in others, but bringing themselves to wholeness. And you only get there by putting yourself in the fire, in the crucible. We also want to develop leaders who have grit. None of this is easy, as we all know so well. Grit, resilience, stamina. Leadership is often tough and lonely, and you need those qualities to get you through. Sharing it collectively makes it worthwhile and more manageable. A sense of humour makes it a joy. And sometimes you just need that sense of humour. I could watch that for hours. You could say, it speaks to me. So there's always got to be a sense of fun. We can be fired up by stuff, but can't take yourself too seriously in all of this. And really we are part of an enormous organism, a living system, just like that first image. We can adapt and create. We need to join in the dance. For me, this is a life work, creating a better future through the creating of more effective, creative and confident school leaders, and ultimately making a real difference in the lives of many thousands of people. Peter Sengi's quote just keeps me very much inspired to keep doing that. And so I come back to where I began. In the words of T.S. Eliot, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Thank you.